Welcome back to another episode of Engage. Ryan Argenta here, the host of the Engage podcast. Today I'm with Justin Vandermark. He's the chair of the Information Technology Committee. Yeah, IT. And I want to make a differentiation here. This is not Delta IT. This is the IT committee within ALPA. Justin, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we've chatted a couple times before, but first official time on the podcast. How you feeling? Did you warm up? Did you stretch out this morning?
Yeah, absolutely. Getting the kids out the door this morning, feeling ready to go.
Awesome. Well, we're happy to have you. Quick background here is we had a chairman's update in June after the MEC meeting, and Captain Criswell touched on a few points about IT, specifically, some of the issues with My Crew and the Hub app and some of the grievances that the union has filed with Delta in terms of Delta being able to see through the Hub app, for example, personal data, personal information on pilots' phones and tablets. And part of that, the resolution of this grievance was Delta said, come on over. We'll show you behind the curtain. We'll show you what we can and can't see. We'll show you our capabilities. And for a long time, I think the better part of a year, that never happened. And now that has finally happened. And Justin, you and your team were the ones to go over to the company and get the grand tour. So maybe give me the background there and how that came about and really what you saw.
Yeah, definitely. As you mentioned, the grievance was filed because it became apparent that the company was able to see TikTok installed on pilots' personal devices, and 24X prohibits the company from seeing the apps that are on a user's personal device. And so we filed the grievance, and as you mentioned, as part of the resolution process, we requested the ability to go over to the company and get a demonstration of what exactly does the Hub app see behind the scenes on Delta's side. And so we took a couple people over there and they gave us a demo, and the learnings essentially were, if there's two different profiles available to all Delta employees who are using their personal devices for Delta business, and those two profiles are personal managed and personal unmanaged. And the key takeaway was that the personal unmanaged profile provides the most privacy to any employee at Delta Airlines using the Delta applications while also protecting a lot of their personal information about their device. So what we found was with the personal managed profile, you're installing a mobile device management profile on your device, and that provides the Hub application and the admin dashboard on the Delta side the ability to see some additional information about your device. It has the ability to filter through and see if certain applications are installed, such as TikTok. It also provides the company a view of your network information of your device. So IP address and the MAC address of any of the networking where in your device. So Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, cellular modem, all of that presents the IP address and the MAC address. Where that's potentially a problem is IP addresses can have a fuzzy location lookup. IP addresses typically are associated with a city and state. And so you potentially may be leaking location information to the company through that avenue. Whereas the personal unmanaged profile has no ability to see anything about your device other than what type of device it is. So it sees just that it's an iPhone or maybe a Samsung Galaxy. And then it also has the ability to see what Delta applications you've installed. So My Crew or Flight Family Communicator, I believe, are the only two available for personal devices. And so the key takeaway again is pilots want to make sure that they are in the personal unmanaged profile when they are using the Hub app and using Delta applications on their personal devices.
Okay. And that was a lot. And for me, that was a lot of technical terms. But zooming out, for starters, right? So in order to download My Crew and Flight Family onto your personal device, which I think all of us have My Crew, It's such an easy platform to have. Jokes aside for having Flight Family on your personal device, but personal choice. Anyway, in order to get those apps on your personal device, you have to download first from, say, the App Store, the Hub app. And from the Hub app, you go through a bunch of processes and settings in order to download My Crew and Flight Family. You also have to do the same thing if you update it. In fact, it looks like there's an update now. Every time I open My Crew, it says you need to update it. So now you have to download the Hub, etc. And so part of this grievance was pilots were getting emails from the chief pilot, or they're getting emails from Delta saying you have to delete TikTok off your personal device. And these pilots were saying, how do you know that I have TikTok on my phone? Right? I mean, that's kind of where this started, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the question arises, 24X prevents the company from being able to see what applications the user has on their phone. So pilots were right to question, how is the company able to see that information from my personal device?
Yeah, so that's kind of how this started. And when we reference 24X, we're talking about the PWA, our contract. Section 24X has specific language that protects pilots from the company gaining or using or accessing private information, kind of like they were. And so on one end, the company is saying, well, if your settings are personal managed, then we can see everything. If you, the user, the pilot, selects personal unmanaged, and we're going to walk you through how to do it, especially on an iOS. It's very simple to do. If you have personal unmanaged, then we have very limited access to some of the information on there, right? Android or non-iOS users a bit different. We'll talk about that. But that's a big picture of what we're talking about, right?
Correct. Yep.
And previously, Alpa was saying, or the guidance was just delete Hub app off your phone, which I did. Oh, easy, delete. And you're saying that just deleting the app doesn't work.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. If you find that your device is in the personal managed profile, that profile it's installed in the operating system. And so simply deleting the Hub application does not also delete that profile from your device at the same time. And so all that same information is still there. Hub is primarily a mechanism of delivering that profile to your device. So once you've downloaded Hub and installed one of these profiles, that profile persists whether you delete Hub or not.
Okay, yeah, interesting. So deleting the Hub app doesn't really do anything. Just make sure your settings are correct. What about on the company iPad? It seems like it's
The company
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the company iPad is a different beast, right? It's not under these personal device profiles. It's under a corporate owned device profile. And to use the company iPad as your EFB, they require the installation of the mobile device management profile. And that gives them really full access to the device. Now, Apple, the iOS operating system, does restrict certain things from mobile device management, such as personal photos, contacts, messages. But the company does have full access to see everything about the specific device. So location, battery state, the network address information that we spoke about before, what apps are installed, what apps are not installed. So they have much more view into the iPad and the EFB. Pilots really should treat that device as if you were using a computer in the crew room or somewhere on the Delta campus. The company owns that device and they have full view of what's going on with that device.
Yeah, which makes sense to me. It's their iPad. We borrow it, we use it. Yes, we can purchase it at the end of its lifespan, but yeah, I agree. Treat it a little different than your personal device. And I see a lot of pilots, even using that kind of like their personal device. And it's like, dude, what are you doing?
Yeah. And again, Apple does restrict your individual personal applications from the data enclosed in those applications from being viewed by the company. But it definitely is something that the company has visibility to, how much data you're using, where that device is located, when it was last charged, what the current battery state is. So it's definitely something pilots should be aware of and thinking about when they're using their device.
Okay. So I want to tee this up. We're going to go through it. And then for listeners, just to get in, because I know there's a ton of questions. We get a number of darts. I know you're swamped as well with questions about really Delta IT stuff. And we've seen the meme, we've seen the complaints about Delta IT and DBMS and crew is from the 90s and all that. You have some information about that you want to get out to pilots, and we're going to get there. So hold on if you're hanging on. But I want to get into really if you can walk through how, especially iOS users, let's start there, can change their settings to make sure they're protected.
Sure. The first step is to understand which profile you're in. And you're going to have to re-download the Hub app if you've already deleted it. And the Hub app will plainly tell you right in the app what profile each one of your devices that you've used Hub with, which profile it's in. So when you first open the Hub app, you have a couple menu options at the bottom. And in the very bottom right corner, one of them is support. And so when you click on support, the second box of information will be a list of the devices that your Delta ID number, employee ID number, has enrolled with the company. And so, for example, on my iPhone, I see my devices. I see my iPhones right at the top. I also see my EFB in my previous iPhone. And so if you click one of those devices, so say if I click my personal iPhone, you come to a screen that gives you some information. And towards the bottom of, well, about halfway down the screen, there's a area labeled device status. And in device status, you have enrollment, and it will say enrolled next to that. But if you click that button, it goes into another page that gives you a little more information. And the key piece of information there is group ID. And group ID for personal devices, will say either personal unmanaged or personal managed. And so if a pilot finds that piece of information tells them personal managed, they really should consider going into their device settings and removing that mobile device management profile.
So I'm following along here. So I'm in the Hub app. I went through exactly where you're talking about enrollment. And side note, we're going to actually try to capture this. Maybe I can do it on my iPhone as a video and then somehow link this to the podcast or put it on our YouTube channel. So I'll leave that in there for now. But anyway, so I'm on my device. I've gone through the process. I'm in the Hub app. And so in enrollment, it shows I've selected my iPhone. And then, yeah, you said about halfway down enrollment, it says enrolled. I click on that. And then the group ID says personal unmanaged. So I'm in good shape, right?
Correct. Yeah, that is definitely what we're recommending to pilots, that you want to be in the personal unmanaged profile, as that gives you the best privacy protections.
But if it says personal managed, you're saying click at the bottom in red, unenrolled device.
Well, the unenrolled device will not delete the mobile device management profile. And so to really ensure that you remove that MDM profile from your device, specifically on Apple, you need to go to the settings application, and
Okay.
then you're looking for the general button, and then VPN and device management. And what you will see there is a bunch of the settings icons, and you'll see mobile device management, and you'll see a bunch of boxes that say Delta Airlines. And so each of those boxes that says Delta Airlines or anything associated with that Delta Airlines profile, you want to click on those, and there's a delete button on there. And so that will ensure that you've removed the MDM profile personal managed from your device. While you do that, you are also going to lose the My Crew application, and if you have Flight Family on there. And so at that point, once you delete it, you're going to have to start over on the setup process to go into the personal unmanaged profile to get your other apps back.
Okay. Trust me, I'm following along, and it's easier than it sounds, especially on a non-video podcast. So bear with us. But on an iOS, it's really quite simple, and we can help you through there. If you are on a non-iOS, Justin, it seems it's a bit more nuanced.
Yeah, Android is a little more complicated. Each of the manufacturers runs like their own flavor of the Android operating system. And in addition to that, Android has the ability to set up different profiles within the operating system. So think of them as like user accounts on your desktop computer. And so it's difficult to pin down exactly where the settings are. I think a good starting point would be to click the unenroll button in the Hub app. And then also you want to go online and find directions specifically from your manufacturer about removing mobile device management from device. It seems the common thread is to go into the settings app, and then there's a security section, and then within that security section there should be options for removing the mobile device management profile.
Okay. And if listeners need a little boost or they need some help, can they contact your committee, maybe via Dart?
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone has any questions about any of the topics we're talking about today, they can absolutely send a dart. As far as helping pilots get out of the personal managed profile on their Android device, if I typically when I receive a dart for that, I just reach out to the pilot directly over phone and we work through it.
Yeah, perfect. Super helpful. Again, on the iOS, it's really easy and a bit more intuitive. And it sounds like non-iOS, a bit more nuanced. So yeah, submit a Dart to the ALPA IT committee, dal.alpa.org, and you can find the IT committee and submit a Dart there. Anything else
Yeah, absolutely.
on 24X or the Hub app, things of that nature before we switch gears to other stuff?
Yeah, I think the final step for helping pilots with this mobile device management, personal managed versus unmanaged, is okay. So I've deleted everything. Now, how do I want my crew, but I want personal unmanaged. And so if you go to Delta and simply type in the search box, my crew, the very first link at the top of the search results is personal mobile devices. And when you click on that link, it has two directions, personal device managed and personal device unmanaged. Just follow the registration instructions for unmanaged and you should be good to go again.
Okay. That's good to know. While we're on topic, I want to bring up in-flight Wi-Fi on both personal devices and the company iPad, because if you're saying they can see your IP address, they can see even if you're in this personal unmanaged, right? And so they have limited access to what Delta can and can't see. If you're on in-flight Wi-Fi and perhaps you've logged into a family member's SkyMiles account to get the free Wi-Fi, or perhaps you've created a Fred Flintstone profile, the company knows that it's not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And with the personal managed profile, as we mentioned in the lengthy description with all the technical details, one of the key pieces of information that they get in that is the Wi-Fi MAC address. And so even though you might be using an account not tied to your name for the SkyMiles login, your phone is communicating with the aircraft's Wi-Fi system and that MAC address gets logged. And so it is not a stretch at all to cross-reference MAC addresses from the aircraft's Wi-Fi system to what MAC addresses are registered to who in the Hub application. And so the FOM prohibits or at least puts restrictions on using the in-flight Wi-Fi while you're on duty. And so pilots should adhere to that. And, if you try to find some clever workarounds, it can still be tracked. And so definitely use caution and make sure we're following the FOM and FAA guidelines on that.
Yeah, you heard it here. That's a good caution for pilots. So, and I guess if you're going to do it, just use your own SkyMiles account, because then you're not really lying, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
just do it. Okay, so I guess moving on, some of the other topics that we want to talk about specifically, and we talked PWA. Now we're in section 23 W1D. Is that it?
That's correct. Yep.
Whew, nailed it. But in larger strokes, we're talking about pilot pay issues and specifically IT. And you joked before the show, you said, Delta IT sees all the memes and they're like, we're not dumb. And so can we give credit where credit's due, and maybe an explanation or a background? Because I know a lot of pilots, we scratch our heads and we're like, this is a Fortune 500 company that's 100 years old. Why can't they get IT right? Like, why do we have DBMS still? Why do we use dot matrix printers at the gates? Like, why? But then the customer facing IT seems really pretty phenomenal, right? And so you've got the in-flight entertainment in the seat back. You can log in and then you get customized ads and they track your data and the cookies. And so when you get on the next airplane, it's like, hey, Justin, here are some ads that are curated for you. So if they can do all these things and they can marry up manifest, passenger manifest and say, well, Fred Flintstone wasn't on the flight, but Ryan Argenta was, why can't we just get pay right?
Yeah, it's a complicated question. To go into some of the background, in our most recent contract, the negotiating team successfully negotiated 23W1D, and that is providing the association with direct database slash API access to DBMS. Breaking that statement down, DBMS is defined as in the PWA as the pilot or crew scheduling system. And, the customer facing applications have seen a lot more updates over the years, but DBMS, for whatever reason, the company has been a little slower to update that system. And they are in the process of updating that system. We saw the pilot pay visibility email with the blurry screenshots. I have been able to see the actual application in use. And so I can assure you that there is something there. We'll pass judgment once we see it, but there's more than just a blurry screenshot, that's for sure. But they've been slowly migrating the data and the business processes off of what is traditionally known as DBMS, which is an kind of an old school mainframe system, into a more modern architecture that works with Amazon Web Services, which is a cloud IT provider. And so as they move more and more data to the new system, they're able to they're able to more quickly and more easily build new applications. And the pay visibility has been the pilot's number one priority. And so flight ops has moved that to the top of the queue. But the micro application, the high value customer application, those are all working on the new and improved cloud hosted application. And so as they move data to the new system, we're slowly gaining access to that data. Right now we are getting database access. And so what that means for us is we can log into a remote computer that is on the Delta network, and we can query information that's in there. Right now, it's a lot of information about schedules and the trip coverage sequence. We have a lot of information about pilots, their block hours, their AE preferences, their current category and past categories. And as that pay data becomes available in the system and they finalize the structure of that data in the new system, we'll also gain access to that. The other part of the 23W1D statement is API access. And so for the non-technical user, API stands for Application Programming Interface. And it has broad meaning, but in this specific meaning, it's a definition of how two computer systems can communicate with each other over the web. And so what this will allow the association to do is to build applications that can query the data directly from Delta rather than volunteers going into the DBMS green screen or going into iCrew to try to gather data. And it will also allow us to gather that data in bulk so we can perform analysis on different things that are happening across the operation.
So, yeah, that was a really great and detailed explanation. And so for my little pea brain, my pilot brain to understand, the gain here, a contractual gain is previously, if you had a pay issue and you somehow submit that to the company, and then you would submit a ticket through scheduling, which is now STS. We can get there in a second. But it was kind of this really complex process to get paid properly. And then really only the company had access to the pure data or the database that said, yes, you were rerouted and you were due this pay. And so from an efficiency standpoint, it took the union a really long time to rectify your pay issue, right? And so by getting this win, the way I understand it, getting this contractual gain to the database is now, it's enhances the workflow of the scheduling committee so they can process your issues faster. It'd be better if crew assist and pilot pay could do it first and do it correctly. But if and when that doesn't happen, then this sounds like the scheduling committee has a little more access to that data instead of having to go to 3 or 4 different places and piece it together, and your pay issues resolved in a matter of, say, weeks or months instead of hours or days.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So as this data has been moving to the new system, Delta has also been building the APIs that will retrieve this data. And we're on track to have access to those APIs. They're currently developed and ready to go. And we're on track to have access to them hopefully by the end of the year. And what that is going to deliver to pilots is within the STS application, we're going to see workflow improvements. And so a lot of this will be transparent to pilots. One of the subtle things that you may see in the near future is when you go to submit an STS ticket, you'll be able to choose your trip from a dropdown of trips that you've recently flown. You won't have to go into iCrew and look up the trip number and the date and base and whatnot.
And
Uh,
that seems like
and
a
so then
minor change, but that's actually pretty significant.
Yeah, it helps a little bit with pilots entering tickets into STS, but the really big improvement comes on the scheduling committee facing side, where when they work a ticket, say you've submitted a ticket, Ryan, and the scheduling committee will have all of the data about your schedule already populated in the ticket. And so currently, what they have to do is go to iCrew. If the rotation was too far back and it's no longer in iCrew, they have to go to the DBMS screen, which is on like a whole separate laptop, and it's just kind of a process. And all that information is just going to be in STS for the scheduling committee to be able to very quickly see, yes, this was the trip as it was built. This is the trip as it was flown. Here's the pilot's time card, and then begin working the issue. And so it should save definitely a significant amount of time for those guys.
Yeah, that'll be hugely helpful, especially for the scheduling committee who's up to their waist in STS tickets. What do you say to pilots who are feeling frustrated about these IT meltdowns, these pay accuracy issues? And I know this is a company problem, but you interface with Delta IT directly. And so, the company, Ryan Gum and Heather Tardif, and also the Delta IT briefed at the MEC meeting in June. You and I were both there, and it really an eye-watering presentation. You talked about the blurry screenshots, but really a great look and a live look at the new program, what they're calling Crew Mod, and what could become on what we see as My Crew, a one-stop shop for all these things to improve pay transparency and pay accuracy. Eye-watering. It was really a beautiful presentation, and credit to the company for coming up with this. But what I heard was the rollout of that is like 3 to 5 years away. And so what are we doing? What is the company doing, and what can the MEC do to help pilot pay issues today?
Yeah, as you mentioned, our hands are a little tied in terms of actually delivering any products to the pilots simply because we don't have access to the data yet, the full data, the pay data specifically. And the company is working on delivering that pilot pay transparency application. I do believe the timeline's a little shorter than 3 to 5 years, but we're going to see this roll out in phases, and that's as the company is moving to the new system. It is frustrating. I definitely understand that is why I've experienced my own frustrations with getting paid for reroute pay correctly. In the meantime, we're trying to improve the process of reporting issues and getting pilots paid correctly through the association's help and the scheduling committee. The One of the big improvements we're going to see coming soon is when you submit a crew assist case, the interaction you have with crew assist is going to be immediately transferable to STS. And so when a pilot submits a crew assist pay case, if they don't get an answer they feel is sufficient or correct, the pilot will have the ability to automatically import that data into STS. And that saves the pilot time in trying to remember the details and typing out the narrative and of what happened and those types of things. But then also on the other side, the scheduling committee within STS, they are going to have visibility to your whole interaction with Crew Assist. There's also identifiers of who was the Crew Assist specialist that maybe did not resolve your problem
Who denied your claim?
satisfactorily.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's going to help the association gather statistics around, all right, assist specialist 001, 9 out of 10 times is messing up reroute pay. And so we can deliver that data to the company and say, look, we nine cases out of the 10 that this person handled, the association found they were doing it incorrectly and the pilot was due more pay. And we have a training problem. And so we can help that crew specialist be brought up to speed on the correct way to pay these different scenarios. So that's the short term of what we're looking at. Long term, as we get access to the data, the promise of the previous ticketing application was to deliver automated auditing of your pay and your schedule. And so that is being worked on currently. The first iteration is looking at specifically 23L4 reroute pay. We've been working with the developer for about a year, and that developer was working off of essentially text data dumps out of DBMS. And so now with this access we get from 23W1D directly to the database, we can dump a whole bid period worth of everyone's trips, and we can more quickly build applications that audit for reroute pay. Because it's once the data is stored in a database format, it's much simpler to build a computer application to begin working on that.
Yeah, it's kind of, I don't know, bittersweet's not really the answer, but it's good that these improvements are coming. It's good that the union is engaged, right? At the moment, the burden is really on the pilot to feel like, hey, I was due pay, and or this is incorrect or inaccurate, and so then you go to the Crew Assist app, you submit a pay issue, and then it's on the company to resolve that issue. And if it's not to your satisfaction, or it's not done correctly still, then at the moment you have to jump over to, say, the union side through STS and submit the same thing. And then the union goes to work on your behalf and rectifies the issue and then says, hey, company, this is actually correct and you need to pay it. And then the company says, oh, okay, thank you, union, we'll pay it. And so on one end, it's good that's in place and that's happening. On the other side, it's like, well, the union's kind of doing the company's job. And I know Delta's working on getting it right the first time so that the scheduling committee at ALPA doesn't have to spend all this time and dues dollars doing the company's job. I know we're getting there, but it is good to know that this is what's going on in the background. And so if you're frustrated with the system, or you're the pilot that feels like, hey, you had no problem getting this high value customer app out to us and hoping that we use it to glad hand the customers, but you can't pay me correctly. So no, I'm not going to walk out in Delta One and shake hands and make sure all the high value customers are feeling loved because you didn't pay me correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand the frustration. As I said, I've experienced it as well. And the union is engaged in trying to improve the process to make sure pilots are paid correctly. And at the same time, we are obviously still pushing on paying pilots right the first time. We shouldn't have to have pilots submitting these issues over and over again. And from what we see when we interact with Delta IT, and just from what we see in the data, they are working on it. And it would be great if progress was much faster, but we do see them working on it. For example, 23L4 specifically, when it first rolled out in, I can't remember if it was August or September 2023, it was a manual process. And in the meantime, in the years since that has passed, I would estimate around 90% of those are being calculated automatically. We see within iCrew, the pay is being added by an automated process. And so there's a lot of edge cases with reroute pay specifically. And so I think they're still chasing some of those edge cases, but they did eventually reach a point where they are getting most of that automated. Another hot topic remains trip coverage. There's a lot of different avenues to go down with that because of ARCOS and batch sizes. But we're trying to use the data that we gather from STS and the issues that pilots are having and the data we get out of the database to communicate areas where the company is falling short. One of the big projects the IT committee was working on the past few weeks was after the IROP in Atlanta at the end of June. There was a lot of 23M7 that appears to have gone unpaid. And we've audited through from June 26th to June 30th, we went through the rotation logs to see what the different trip coverage sequences were. And hopefully, we're going to see several more pilots be paid 23M7 in accordance with the PWA because of trip coverage sequence being broken.
Yeah, and if you're scratching your head on 23M7, there's a couple different podcasts that we've done on that topic specifically, so you can reach back and listen to that. But it's essentially covering trips out of trip sequence, meaning somebody's getting a trip that shouldn't have gotten it, and somebody else should be paid for it. And so this is the back end, right? There's an IROP, there's a thunderstorm, something's happening. The company's trying to run an airline, right? And so they're just covering trips, doing the thing, and it's kind of like clean up the mess later. And your committee and the scheduling committee are really the ones that sort through that and come up with the solutions of, hey, these are the people who should have been paid. And it sounds like that is becoming more and more automated than a manual process.
Yeah, absolutely. In the past, the data was simply not available to us to audit a time period in bulk. And so there's very obvious scenarios where they just go from created trip to inverse assignment. There was several where that occurred greater than 8 hours to trip report time. And, there should be someone who's paid 23M7 for that because we know people have standing green slips in and white slips, and those steps of coverage should have been run before going straight to inverse assignment. So there's some pretty clear scenarios where 23M7 should be paid that we can identify having access to this bulk data.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's a positive note. What else do you want to say to almost 18,000 pilots? I'm sure when you fly with people and you say, or maybe you don't, but maybe you say, yeah, I'm on the IT committee. I'm sure you get the same questions. And what do you want to say to the pilot group?
I think the biggest message is we are engaged with the company. We are trying to continue to have these discussions around getting data access, but it is a slow process. The company is in the process of moving off of a legacy infrastructure to a new, more modern infrastructure. And one of the best examples I always give to everyone, pilots have asked, like, well, why don't we have the pay data? And in one of the meetings I had with Delta IT, regarding that as they're building this pay visibility application. This was a while ago, so don't take this as pay visibility is not coming anytime soon, but we asked for pay data, and the developer, he pulled up a time card and he had a bunch of highlights and boxes written all over it, and then reference to where that comes from in DBMS, because they're trying to build the map of how are they going to put this data into the new system. And so it's an ongoing process. They're moving to this new modern system, and it's taking time. It's unfortunate. This really, I think a lot of pilots feel should have been done 10, 15 years ago, but it's in process. They've allocated money for it. We're continuing to stay engaged with them and make sure that the pilots' concerns are being heard, and that we continue pushing forward on getting access to this information so we can make sure pilots are being scheduled according to the PWA and paid according to the PWA.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, thanks for that. And, Justin, you're a pilot just like us. You feel the same frustrations. You talked about your reroute pay shenanigans. And so you're working on behalf of Delta pilots. You're not Delta IT. Want to drive that point home. But, thanks for the work. And so from an IT perspective, give us a little snippet of who you are, the human Justin Vandermark, because, you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh, let's geek out on some IT stuff and then go fly my trip. Like, tell me about you.
Absolutely. I went to school to be a pilot. I went to Western Michigan University. But while I was deciding what I would major in, IT has always been an interest of mine. So I sat there at a crossroads. And when I first entered Western Michigan, they had shiny new Cirrus aircraft. And so that kind of pulled me that direction. But in the meantime, I've always been a tinkerer. I have had a long history of building servers in my closet and writing my own programs to automate things for myself. And that itch never really went away. And when I came back from UNA during COVID, we were really getting into doing more and more of our flight planning and management through the EFB. And if you recall, we had the HTML flight plan prior to Mission Plus. And I started seeing all these apps pop up. We have Flight Deck Pro, we have Widget Weather, and then we were trying to, you would receive an email of the PDF and you had to open it in a certain application and all this stuff. And I just found it frustrating that there were so many steps just to get a flight going on the EFB. And so I started dabbling in iOS shortcuts. And, on those long transcons from LA to Detroit, you sit there and tinker with, well, how can I make this quicker? And that's kind of always how I've felt about technology. How can this technology make my life easier? And so I built what has now become Quick Flight Plus, which is we were able to get the
Yeah.
company to take on that project and manage it and distribute it to pilots. So it was completely removed from my hands, which I think is fantastic because I shared it with a few people and next thing I know I was running support for it. And there was breaking changes all the time. So it's great that they've taken that on. But that's the kind of stuff that has always interested me. How do we use technology to make our day-to-day lives easier? And so that's what drives me forward. And I really think using technology in the sense of what we're doing in the IT committee to make pilots' lives easier in terms of getting paid correctly, but also down the road, finding these areas where things are not being done correctly and either getting them fixed or building tools to make it so pilots can be paid correctly is that's always what's driven me forward in working on this type of stuff.
Yeah, I love it, man. And that's really the beauty of the union, union work is we have all these incredibly smart pilots in different arenas, IT for you. And then it all comes together, right? Volunteers come out and say, hey, I have a background in IT or I want to make this better. And somebody in safeties, I'm really interested in safety management and they come out of the woodwork and, our comm volunteers. And so it's just really cool to see. And so I'm always interested in putting that humanity into like, why did Justin volunteer to be on the IT committee? Meanwhile, I have the vision of like pilots are sitting in the corner sharpening their spears. And so that's why I really want to distinguish, Justin's working with us. He's one of us, and so is Delta IT. They're humans too, but sounds like we're getting there. We've got some good things coming. Patience is definitely a virtue. Pilots don't really have that virtue, but we can, right? And so
Yep.
thanks for the update on all of that. And again, if you want to make sure you're in the right settings on your iOS or your non-iOS device for the Hub app, you can go back, since this is a podcast, go back and listen to it as many times as you need to go through those steps. I'd also recommend taking it off of like 1.5 times so you can hear it slower. And then we will do what we can to get some video steps out there for people to do that. But in the meantime, submit a DART to the ALPA IT committee. Justin Vandermark, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for being here and everything you do for us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Ryan.
You're listening to Engage, the podcast for Delta pilots. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform, and receive notifications when a new episode is available.